Hello and welcome to my presentation. As Tracy said, my name is Gilly-Elle McKeown and I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Tasmania. My research focuses on organised physical activity and sporting experiences of Australian autistic children and adolescents and their parents. The impetus of this PhD research grew from my daughter's experiences in preschool sport and an apparent lack of research centering on the welfare-related experiences of autistic children along with their families in sporting contexts. Since undertaking my PhD, I've interviewed 18 parents of autistic children about their perceptions of their children's organised physical activity experiences and their own experiences as the parent of a young autistic person. I am using a narrative approach and together we have produced stories highlighting their experiences. I use this approach as it allows a deeper understanding of what is happening in organised physical activity settings, amplifies the voice of those in the wider autistic community, and because it can be an accessible way of understanding for coaches and service providers in the future. My research questions focus on barriers and facilitators, helpful strategies, and long-term effects of participation. Currently, I am finalising my themes, but there are many interesting aspects to this research and the stories are already powerful. I look forward to discussing more about the specifics of my research in the future. I'll just provide you an example of my own narrative that I wrote that has been published in this paper on the screen to give you an idea about how this methodology adds a different perspective. I decided to give gymnastics one last attempt despite it being so traumatic last time. As I walk into class, the instructor refuses to make eye contact with me. She is blatantly ignoring both Grace and I. I notice that the class is set up for free play, which Grace loves because she can run around, jump, crawl and climb on the balance beam. Soon after the session commences, Grace discovers there is a Velcro strip on one of the soft climbing pieces. She becomes fixated with it, taking it off and sticking it back on. While she does this, the other children are trying to climb and Grace does not even realise they are climbing all over her as she is so transfixed with the Velcro. The parents start to crowd around, trying to show their children how to climb over Grace safely. While they do this, they give Grace a disapproving look and tut at me. The parents' disapproving looks get to me, so I try and move Grace away and engage her in a game of chase, but she just goes straight back to the Velcro. I try and move her again and she goes into a meltdown. All she wants is the Velcro. The instructor hears Grace's screams and comes over to see what is happening. I explain that my daughter wants to play with the Velcro and will not move away. She replies, "Well, she will have to." I feel many of the mother's eyes burning on me as Grace's meltdown has drawn the attention of everyone in the room. I know what they are all thinking. Naughty child, incompetent mother. I try and ignore the stares and concentrate on Grace. The instructor comes over to me again and says, "Maybe you would be better off just taking her home. You do not fit here." I respond by saying that she just needs time to calm down and then I will be able to re-engage her. She then says, "Can you both please just leave?" As I reluctantly pick up my bags, it only increases Grace's distress. I end up having to carry her out of the building with her kicking and screaming, and we both leave in tears. I can confirm from my research that this is not an isolated incident, and many of the parents and children in my study have been treated in a similar way. So I hope you can see why I feel so strongly about this research topic and this methodology in particular. Today, I want to talk to you about the relationship between autism and sport based on the current literature. I will give an overview of autism, its relation to sport, briefly discuss motivation, and then offer some helpful strategies for coaches. Firstly, I wanted to discuss what autism is. In Australia, recent estimates indicate that 1 in 68 people is autistic. However, the real figure will be much higher as many people remain unidentified. The traditional viewpoint of autism is deficit-focused and negative. To meet the diagnostic criteria for autism, 2 distinguishing features have been identified. The first is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. This is described as difficulties in engaging in conversation, difficulty starting conversation, sharing interests, and difficulty in forming relationships. The second is a restricted, repetitive pattern of behaviour, interest, or activity. This might include stereotyped or repetitive use of words or movements, struggling with change, and having fixed interest. These assumptions often result in autistic people who need to change themselves and fight against their natural instincts to fit in and be accepted. Obviously, autistic people do have challenges in those areas, but I would like to introduce you to a potentially new perspective of autism. Neurodiversity seeks to explain that autism is not a disorder, it is a difference in neurobiology and therefore a difference in the way our brains work. A popular analogy is autistic people's brains run on an Android system and neurotypical brains run on Apple. The deficit focus of autism is not helpful. Autistic people have many strengths which are often overlooked. Additionally, autistic people have fewer difficulties when connecting with each other. This is a basic overview, but I feel it is an important distinction to make, as appreciating autistic people for who they are is key to building a better coaching relationship. I'll take you through a little of the literature regarding sport and autism now. Firstly, I wanted to touch upon why physical activity is important for autistic people. The benefits of sport and physical activity are primarily improvements in physical health, mental health, and social connection, just like for everybody else. Specifically for autistic people, physical activity can be very important in terms of regulating our sensory world, giving us proprioceptive input, and if sport becomes a focused interest, it can be the biggest connection point we have. Despite these benefits, autistic people do have challenges in sporting participation. On an internal level, an autistic child may have difficulties with motor skills, communication skills, understanding rules, coping in a group environment, and sensory challenges. These factors will be individual to the child. For example, some children love the sensation of water on their skin and love swimming, whilst other children hate the sensation of water. Externally, ableism is problematic, and autistic people have a higher likelihood of bullying or abuse when participating in sport. Additionally, societal misunderstandings of autistic people can lead to prejudice and stigma, which can manifest in coaches not being motivated to work with autistic youth. If a coach starts off with a negative impression of a child, it will be detrimental to the coaching relationship, so we need to change this. Inclusion practices, funding, and providing autism education for coaches are all currently inadequate, and great improvement is needed. Furthermore, the intense pursuit for success and competition can be difficult for an autistic child, as they may struggle to cope with the pressure. It could be assumed that due to these factors, autistic children are not motivated to take part in sport. Whilst it is true that autistic children are more likely to spend more time in isolation and on screens, we cannot assume that autistic children do not want to participate, as there are many who have a great interest and a great talent for sport. The barriers may just be too great in many cases. If we look briefly at the self-determination theory, we see that motivation relates to three aspects. One, autonomy, where one feels like they have a choice, which can be affected in autism, as autistic people are often seen as incapable of giving input. Two, competence, which includes being effective in the activity and can be affected by low confidence rates of autistic people who may feel disheartened by their sporting ability and may give up. And three, relatedness, which is the need to connect and feel like they belong and can be impacted by stigma, discrimination, exclusion, bullying, and abuse. If we do not meet the needs of autistic people, their motivation will be low and they will not want to participate in sport. However, if we can provide appropriate supports, we can increase their motivation and enhance their participation. So what can coaches do to help autistic people enjoy sport participation? Firstly, if you have been fortunate enough to have coached an autistic individual before, you may have found strategies that worked well. However, heterogeneity is important in autism, and everyone has different sensory experiences, interests, and strengths. Therefore, the strategies you use must be individualized for that person. I suggest that the most important aspect in coaching a young autistic person will be creating a strong relationship with them and their parents. They will be able to tell you what challenges they have in sport and what strategies may help them. Open communication as they progress is important to solve problems. As mentioned before, try to give them autonomy around what works for them. Autistic people are processing so much information at any one time, they may need direct, unambiguous language and possibly repetition of instructions. Working memory can be difficult and they may need instructions to be paced and given one at a time. Physical demonstrations can be helpful, as can video modelling or visual instructions. It is important to understand an autistic person may require a break in the session to cope with sensory overwhelm or to process the instructions given, and you have to be happy to facilitate this. Respect, encouragement, and positive reinforcement will work much better than punishment. Autistic people are hypersensitive to emotions and they will not respond well to yelling. Throughout your team, it is important to promote an inclusive atmosphere. Providing a positive example to your team will enable the autistic person to form friendships and feel part of the team. Promote a culture of fun and taking part rather than intense competition and pressure. Concentrate on increasing their intrinsic motivation, as this will be key to their enjoyment and continuation of the sport. Obviously, this is only a brief overview of some helpful strategies. There are many more, and I'm happy to expand upon these further with you. I'm determined to ensure that autistic people's experiences of organised physical activity and sport improve. After listening to my presentation, I hope you feel increasingly informed and positive about working with autistic people and have some understanding of how best to move forward in your coaching. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Please feel free to contact me on the email address or the Twitter account on the screen. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant, thank you, Gilly. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. Yeah, I just want to firstly thank you, Gilly, for sharing your personal story. I think it was really brave of you to do that and really, really helpful in getting to understand. I mean, I work with young people in residential care, some of whom have autism or undiagnosed autism. So yeah. I thought it really brought it to life. So thank you very much. Really good, really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you thought that, because yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons I've chosen that methodology. So I'm glad that it came across that way as well.
Any other comments, questions? I have a question, Gilly. You spoke about the discipline. I had kids here at the weekend and one child had autism, and as far as discipline, and I know that you don't want punishment, but what would be a good way to provide discipline if they're acting out, for example? How would you, in a coaching environment, or even just play, how do you do that in an effective? Yeah. And I know you said think about the individual, but maybe some strategies.
Yeah, I think obviously a lot of it will depend on the reason. If they're acting out because they're bored, that's one thing. If they're acting out because they're overwhelmed, because the environment's too much and there's too many people and it's too noisy and they just can't cope. Obviously, if it's more of the overwhelm side of it, then as I said, giving them like a break. So that would help them to just have some time on their own. If they've got specific sensory tools, a lot of autistic kids will have fidget tools or something like that, or they'll have headphones, and they can just have that time out where they can just basically cope with the environment a little bit better. And then if they have that break, then they're more likely to come back and they'll find it easier to cope for the rest of the session, and then obviously they're less likely to act out. So obviously that would be one thing if you think is more of a sensory issue. Basically all behaviour obviously has a reason, so trying to work out what is going on. And obviously if you know the child well, if you've spoken to the child and the parents, which is why I really recommend building that relationship as soon as you get an autistic person in your team or your club or whatever the case may be, building that relationship and finding out what strategies work for that particular person, what will set them off and make it worse, and what helps, definitely is the best first step that you can have. And then once you know that, it's easier to manage behaviour going forward, because you already have a grounding on that particular person and what works best for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so helpful. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Gilly, and yeah, I took a lot from that presentation.